If you're like me, you probably have a love for vintage hankies. The beautiful florals, the colors. Just recently, my grandma sent me a few more to add to my collection. I was inspired to create kind of like a nostalgic vintage hanky journal that's filled with beautiful things that inspire me. I created this journal using scrap pieces of vintage hankies, fabric, lace, a floral scrapbook of sorts. I am also so excited to finally have washi tape available once again. The collection for this year is full of flowers, and of course there's going to be restocks of previous designs, so all of our washi will be available for all of you Tuesday, August the 19th at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I hope you find a beautiful washi tape that speaks to your own style and that you would love to use in your journals and projects. The front cover is a paper collage where I stitched part of a hanky. I also used some glue to make sure that the air bubbles weren't visible, and I stitched it to a vintage piece of paper. I took this old piece of French paper, and that's where I stitched my vintage hanky on, and I just cut part of the hanky, and as much as it hurt to cut it up, I'm trying not to hoard my precious things and actually use them. I did scan it before I cut into it so that it's always safe and sound at least. This little piece here is actually a little piece of cotton that I tea stained. A scrap piece of some sewed fabric that my mom actually passed through her antique sewing machine. This little snippet that looks like notebook paper that you would get in a notebook like from school or, in class, and it just gave me such a warm, nostalgic feeling, and I just thought it was the sweetest thing. So I wanted to include it on the cover of my journal. I thought it was fitting because it went with my grandma's hanky, and this is my mom's hand-sewn little patched piece. And I just used some of my washi, stitched it on fabric, and glued it in between the lines, which I just think it's so playful, but it really is inspiring to me, and I think it gives the theme that this journal is very patchy, it's nostalgic, and then this is just a little lace that I added to make it a little flip, as if you're flipping a piece of your note paper on the cover. The construction of the cover was just such a joy because I didn't really have anything in mind. I just knew I wanted to use up this particular hanky and just pieces of scraps that were left over from other projects. This little button tab I made out of a piano paper box, and then I just stitched on the little buttons. So the spine is just some vintage fabric, different pieces of lace, that other piece of hanky, and a nice little ruffle and lace. This fabric here, I think it's one of my favorites now. It was a very dark, kind of saturated blue, and I passed it through a coffee and tea mixture, and it caused it to be a little bit lighter, and it looks a little bit more like softer, more vintage and worn. So this is really beautiful, and I just love how it feels, and these little tattered pieces of that cloth make me really happy. So that's the front cover, and when you go on the inside, I've decorated the pages enough so that I can just add my writing and my photos. I really wanted to take the time to decorate them as much as I wanted to, and then obviously I can add any more ephemera or any pieces as I'm journaling. So in the first pocket in the front cover, I ended up stitching some beautiful scrapbook paper and then this little linen. So I did scan some of the hankies and I turned them into scrapbook paper so that I can actually use them in my journal, as well as scanning some of my vintage paper doll dresses that I picked up from an estate sale. So there's lots of beautiful kits in this shop that you can play around with and print out and use in your own journal. But in this pocket, this isn't a real linen, it's just a digital, as well as this little hanky. I wanted to make a floating pocket out of my washi tape. All I did was I put my washi on a piece of paper and then I cut it out and stitched it on some scrap paper and just added some lace, and it's a really beautiful little floating pocket. And inside I just have an envelope with my initials. I've been saving this envelope for a little bit and I want to use it in this journal. One of the little hankies that I received from my grandma, just a scanned version so I can journal on it. A little label and a paper doll dress. So I'm just keeping those in there so that I can use them throughout the journal. I took one of the yellow hankies and I wanted to include it and stitch it on here so that it looks like an actual hanky is folded in my journal, but it's actually paper. So I'm going to journal here, and I could even journal alongside here if I wanted to. I just love how immediately when you open up the journal, this is the first thing you see. So on the second page, this is actually a little flip. This is the back of the tea stained paper. This is one of the hanky papers. I tipped it into the page using some beautiful brown floral scallop washi, which I love. I've been wanting to make a beautiful brown for the longest time. And if you put the same washi and you flip it, you actually get a nice little scallop border. And with some of my sentiment tape, I put small unfolding of petals. And I can just journal in here, add a little Polaroid, giving myself more space to journal. On this page, I actually have this little journal card. I designed a couple journal cards to include with certain orders. You will either get a little journal card or a surprise sticker. I always love including those little extra details. I think it makes it really special. And of course, it's double-sided, so you can use it as a little tip-in. Look at how beautiful that would look there. I might actually include that there. That's gorgeous, and I'll just use some washi to tip this in. But I had it paper clipped onto this page. And this page is actually from a book page, and I just really loved this image. And I folded the extra part over. I created a little tab out of my washi. So I've been experimenting with the different ways that I can use it, and this is one of the washis, but I backed it with some watercolor kind of texture paper. So this is just a little tab. I absolutely love it. It's some vintage wallpaper that I scanned and altered to turn into tape. This is what it originally looks like. Super colorful and pretty. But I like finding new and different ways to use washi. And this time I turned it into a little paper tab. So then on the second page, this page makes me so happy as well. I love the collage that I ended up creating on this page. So this is the back of that book page. Hopefully you can see. So what I did is I just took little scrap pieces. This is from an envelope. This is some of my washi. This is from a book page, ledger. One of my paper doll dresses that I scanned and cut out. I just patched it together and I passed it through my sewing machine. So this way it's a little pocket that I can actually tuck anything that I'd like in there. I absolutely loved this image of the little fawns. I believe that's the baby and that's the mama. And they're in a beautiful meadow of flowers. And I wanted to make it look like a vintage photo. And then on the back, it's just some vintage floral fabric from my collection. This is another one of the little surprise freebies that you might be getting. I just think it's so cute, a nice little ephemera piece. This is a hanky from the kit, and I turned it into a pocket. I folded the paper in half, and then I folded the bottom up, stitched it together to make a pocket, and I backed it up with some vintage wallpaper. I just love those blue flowers. And then on this side here, just an old vintage envelope. I really liked having this little window because I can see the wallpaper on one side and I can see this little hanky strip. This is another one of the hanky ledger papers. I stitched a little snippet of a hanky as a pocket, and then this is just a little Polaroid. It's not a real one. What I like to do is take the photos that I take on my phone, and in Photoshop I turn them into vintage faux Polaroids and give myself the space to journal. And so this is a beautiful little rose that I took. We went to a rose festival and I ended up taking a couple photos of the beautiful flowers. This is just some writing paper. On pages like these where I only have a hanky, I'm thinking of placing a photograph right in the center so it kind of acts as a little floral frame. And then journaling on the previous page. This is just some really pretty blue vintage paper. It's not authentic. I didn't want to use the authentic sheets, so this is just a digital, and I loved how it printed out. This is another strip of some washi. This is another hanky that I folded to make a pocket page. And in the pocket, I have more photos that I took. Lots of flowers. This was a flower-filled summer, so I want to fill this book up with all of my family photos. We had some really lovely moments this spring and summer, so I want to capture them all in my special little journal. This is some music paper that I tea stained, and I just added some vintage lace on the side. This page I love because I think it's just so playful. In that box, let me see if I can find it. This is the box that I found. It is full of paper doll dresses and like little hats and accessories. Some of them have seen better days, which is why I scanned them. They're just so beautiful. They're so fragile. It also comes with interactive ephemera like this one, and it has little pieces that you can take out. And you can kind of flip them out and put them in the little slots. This is another one. Like, look at this refrigerator. Isn't this adorable? And you can pull them out. So this is a little teacup. Such beautiful vintage little treasures. And authentic vintage ephemera that just makes me so happy. There's even little babies. So there's a little baby. Let me put them there. And it comes with clothes as well, so you can cut them out. I just think it's going to be so much fun to like dress her up in my journal, and then I'm thinking of fuzzy cutting these ephemera pieces and gluing them on this page. So I really loved this idea of having my little paper doll in my journal, and I just stitched it to the ledger and I made it flip out by adding some washi tape. So I scanned the top like little border sections of wallpaper from my collection, and I turned it into washi tape. This is the other side, join here and union made, and it just repeats. So I loved making that washi because it's just so quirky and unique. And on the back side, this is just some vintage paper. You can see the other part here. Another one of those paper doll dresses, but this one is a digital. This is just some ledger paper. I'm just going to write on there. Lots of writing spaces. This is some more of that hanky paper. I loved this blue. And then I just used some sentiment washi and little snippets of my washi tape just to give it a patched look. I'm thinking of adding little photos and like little pressed flowers and journaling around the ledger. It's going to be so much fun to actually use this journal. This spread is probably one of my favorites because of this wallpaper. This is authentic vintage wallpaper, and I did actually scan the whole sheet for those that love this kind of floral. It's just so pretty, and then I just paired it with a little snippet from a book page, and I turned it into a top pocket by stitching it to the book page. And this is a photo of me when I was a little girl. I scanned a lot of my baby photos, and I want to print out the digital version and keep the original photo in a photo album, so I'm going to be playing around with those within the book. And then this is another hanky that I turned into ledger paper. So I'm going to do my journaling here, and you can already imagine, like, let's say this is a photo. I can add my photo where the writing is and then journal right on top. Even add a little paper doll dress and include some baby photos. It's just going to be so much fun. Like I said, I want this to be a nice, beautiful floral scrapbook to play with. I included the full hanky. I love, love, love this spread so much. It looks like an actual little hanky on paper. I'm going to write in all of the white space, or I can add a photo as well, but this just makes me so happy. And this is the center of the signature. This is actually a hanky that Amy from Washi Made Cottage sent me. I absolutely loved the flowers, and it was a little bit too big to include in the journal. So what I did is I flipped the bottom up to turn it into a little pocket to make it the center of my journal. So in this pocket here, you can see I just stitched it all up. This is a postcard, and believe it or not, this is not a real postcard. It's a print. And it just says, "To greet you most sincerely, beautiful roses." And you can see on the back, I actually designed this to look like a real postcard. It's from my collection, and this is also a little freebie that you might get, as well as this little sentiment card. So I definitely want to use these little pieces in my journal. And then on this page, I have just some vintage ephemera. I can write on there. I really liked the border, and this really sweet photo of a swan. I think that would be sweet to include in the center. I like to have little pieces in the pockets so that I already have decorative things to use in my journal as I'm writing. So for the back of that hanky page, it's actually just some tea-stained paper. And inside the tea-stained paper, I actually stitched with my sewing machine one of my hankies so that it looks like an actual hanky is inside of my journal. And that way I got some more writing space and decorative space that sits inside of that tea-stained paper. And all of that is glued onto the back of this paper. So I hope I explained that correctly. So on this side of the page, I actually made a little tuck spot here with some washi tape, and then I stitched some lace on the edge. And I just think this looks like real vintage wallpaper or a piece of fabric, especially if you stitch it and you sew it. The two washies that I used were this one, and they're actually in the same bundle. So I just used the thicker washi in the center, and to give it the effect of like a wallpaper border strip or a piece of trim, I then took the smaller washi and I used it on the outsides. And then I just cut it, stitched it, and turned it into a little tuck spot. So I can include anything that I'd like in these little pockets. On this page, this is the back of the hanky, and I just patched my leftover scraps. So ledger, bit of scrapbook paper. I fuzzy cut the hanky so that it looked like a little hanky. Just fell into my journal. And here I can add some journaling, I can add ledger. Here I can journal within the flowers, add some photos, just do whatever I'd like. Add some sentiments, more patched pages. I wanted the patched look to not only be on the outside, on the cover and on the back cover, but on the inside as well. And I also wanted a lot of space for journaling. This is another pocket as well with a little label, some more washi on the bottom. Another one of the hanky ledgers, and I just attached some vintage ephemera. I think this was a grocery list that somebody wrote, and I loved their penmanship. So I wanted to keep this in my journal so it could be safe forever. This is the other side, so I just basically wrapped that around the edge because this hanky ledger didn't print properly. I ran out of ink as this was printing, so in order to just kind of hide that little mistake, I just wrapped around the grocery list. And then on this page, just another scrap piece of paper that I turned into a full-length pocket. And this is actually some fabric, so I just stitched it on the edge to give it some texture. And in the pocket, I took this vintage envelope, and I just used some of the beautiful floral washi from our newest collection. This is actually a piece of fabric that I scanned. And all I did is I just placed it on the little flap and I cut the excess. I could even go through my sewing machine and stitch this as well to give it more of like a real fabric effect if I wanted to. But I just think that that looks so pretty tucked into the pocket page. This is the back side of the music paper, just some fabric. Here is the other part of that little hanky pocket. I can use this and glue this on any page and just add more ephemera, but I like to just keep those nice and tucked within the journal. Another one of the little linens here, and then this is the back page of this other hanky, and I just folded it. Some writing paper, some more decorative hanky ledger, the other side of the envelope. I loved this pocket page so much, just a little piece of ledger so I could put it anywhere that I need to. This is from a children's book, A Little Cat, and I just think that this paired so beautifully together. I love the vintage colors and some more washis just to close up those awkward little spaces. Love that blue. This is from a decorating book. I used some scrap paper and made a little pocket on a book page. And these are just scrap papers left over from other projects. And I just really enjoyed this image. I think it's just so pretty. So I just put it in my journal. Ooh, what is a plate doing in here? This is a porcelain plate, and I want to journal around in it. I just love the idea of putting little plates in your journal. And this is from an old album. I just used some washi to make sure it didn't rip when I passed it through the sewing machine. And this is the other side of the book page. And the last sheet is just some tea stain paper that I turned into a full-length pocket. It's the back side of the front hanky. And so that wraps around the entire journal. And all I have to do is journal within the flowers. And I can tuck all of my little ephemera and special pieces inside the pocket. And then the back side is just all of the stitching that I did when I was sewing up the cover of the journal. This is a super special journal for me, and a journal that I'm going to have so much fun filling up. I hope that this video gave you some ideas for how you can use your vintage hankies, or any kind of floral fabric really. I will leave the links below to the hanky pages and the paper dolls kit if you're interested in checking them out. and playing with them in your own journals, as well as my washi. I hope you find a design that speaks to you, and if you're a vintage floral lover, I hope you find something that inspires you and that you want to use in your own personal projects. I will be filling up all of these pages and sharing the full completed flip through when all of the pages have been filled in. I want to create, just like my December journal, a spring and summer journal every year that is inspired by the treasures that I find during that time. So until next time, I hope that you're having a beautiful day, and I can't wait to talk to you soon with another journal and another project.